Hey, it's Joe Crump, another video in the Outrageous Claims series. This next one is 5 zero-down offers you can make today. Earlier in this series, I've been talking about some of these structures. I'm going to try to go into them in very quick detail because I only got a few minutes on these videos. We use a thing that I call the zero-down hierarchy structure, or I'm sorry, zero-down structure hierarchy. And what it does is allows you to decide what type of offer to make on a property depending on what you're trying to accomplish and what the seller needs. So the top of the hierarchy is subject to, taking the property subject to the existing loan. Then there's multi-mortgage. Then there's land contract, also known as contract for deed. Then there's a lease option, and then there's assignable cash deals, also known as wholesaling. So those are the 5 zero-down structures that you need to worry about. If you're buying the property, then you always want to start at the top of the hierarchy at subject to, because that gives you the most control. You have to assume when you buy a property that you're the most ethical person in the room, that you're going to do the right thing. So in order to do the right thing, you need to be in control. So you take the deed and you get control of that deed when you buy the property. Now, when you're selling a property, you want to give the least control. So the hierarchy reverses, and now lease options are at the top of the deal, top of the structure. So if you're selling a property that you own, you want to sell it and give that buyer the least control of the deal. You're still going to treat them fairly. You're still going to follow the rules, but you're going to give them less control. So if they default, if they fall apart on the deal, you're going to be able to get that property back without too much pain. And as you go up the structure from that end, next one up is land contract, then multi-mortgage and subject to. You never sell a property subject to. You only buy a property subject to, because subject to takes control away from the seller and gives it to the buyer. So you're going to buy subject to, you're going to sell lease option, top and bottom part of the structure. Even though I've got assignable cash deals on the bottom, that happens less often. You usually don't keep those properties, so I don't usually include that as the weakest point in the structure, because you're not keeping those properties. So those are the 5 zero-down structures. Subject to is where they deed you the property. They have an existing property mortgage on the property. Usually it's pretty close to the value of the property, maybe a little bit of equity in it. So you take that deal and then you turn around and lease that property, and that's how you make money. The second one is multi-mortgage. Maybe they've got a lot of equity in the property. Maybe they owe $40,000 on a $100,000 property and there's $60,000 of equity. You could still buy that thing. Let's say you buy it for $80,000. You got $40,000 on it. You could put a second mortgage on there, and now you've got $80,000 that you're paying to them, $40,000 note paying to them, and $40,000 that you're paying to the bank on a regular basis. And you make sure you make those fully amortized notes so that you can pay them off and there's no balloon payments on that. As they say, balloons are for clowns. Don't do balloons when you're buying. Only do balloons when you're selling. Then you can make the decision after that 3 years or 5-year balloon, if you're selling, whether or not to extend that, assuming that the person's making their payments. Then you could extend that balloon if they need to. But you can also encourage them to cash it out by getting a new loan if they're able to do that. So that's the multi-mortgage. The next one is land contract. Land contract does not transfer the deed. Subject to and multi-mortgage do. Land contract does not. It's just a piece of paper that's an agreement between you and the seller, saying you agree to pay X amount of dollars over X period of time at X interest rate, X payment. And when that payment is done, when they're completely paid off, then the seller transfers the deed over to you and you take the deed to the property after the fact. That gives the seller the right to take it back from you if you default. And if you have the deed, then you have to be willing to give it back to them. They can't take it back from you. So it's a little weaker structure as far as control goes, but if I'm selling a property, I wouldn't mind selling on a land contract if I got enough of a down payment. It's a little harder to get rid of a land contract buyer than it is to get rid of a lease option buyer. So keep that in mind if you ever sell on a land contract. But if you're selling properties on terms and you've got a property that's not in very good condition, it's not habitable, then you want to sell it on a land contract rather than on a lease option, because a lease option, they could take it to a judge and say, hey, this property is in terrible condition, my furnace went out, and then you'd have to fix it. On a land contract, the judges say, yeah, you're the buyer of this property. You have to take care of that furnace yourself, and they wouldn't require you as that landlord to do that. All right. The next one in that structure is, so now we've got subject to multi-mortgage land contract. The next one is lease options, and we've talked about lease options a lot. It's essentially just leasing a property with the option to buy. You'll never want to do this personally, but you want to sell it this way, but never buy it this way, because as the seller, it gives you more control. If that person defaults, you can get rid of them, usually with just an eviction. There are some complications that can happen, but it doesn't happen very often. So I'll just leave it that it's easier to get rid of a buyer on a lease option than it is to get rid of a buyer some other way who defaults. Of course, if they fulfill their end of the contract, you of course will want to fulfill your end as well. Then the last structure is assignable cash deals, and this is the one that most teachers talk about all the time, and it's wholesaling deals. Right? It's assignable cash deals. So essentially, you're getting a purchase agreement to buy a property for an X amount of dollars, preferably dramatically under market value, and then turning around and selling it and charging usually an assignment fee. Let's say you get a property that's worth $100,000, you get it for $50,000, you add $5,000 assignment fee on it, the new buyer gets it for $55,000 cash, they come in and cash you out, and you get $5,000, $50,000 goes to the seller, and the new buyer has a chunk of equity still in that property. You won't be able to sell an assignable cash deal for sale by owner most of the time if you don't get an extremely good deal. And I'm talking 40, 50% under market value. So, and maybe even more than that if you're down in the 20s, 30s, $40,000 price range, and maybe a little less than that if you're up in the $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $700,000 price range. So keep that in mind. Remember, as an investor, there's only two ways that you can make money. One is you buy a property on terms at or below market value, and two is that you buy a property substantially under market value. If it doesn't fit one of those two criteria, run away from it. It won't make you money. So there's lots of ways to do those types of deals. Different zero-down structures. You can use cash. There's other things that you can do, but I would suggest that if you're new to this, that you don't use any of your cash. You never use a loan. That's where you make the biggest mistakes, and that's where you lose money and screw up your credit. If you do the zero down structures, it might take you a little bit longer to learn how to talk to sellers credibly and intelligently and give them an offer that makes sense. It takes a while to learn that, but we're talking a few months. And if you'll learn that, it's something you'll never forget, and it'll become much, much easier, and you'll be able to do it into the future, and you'll never want to use loans or cash again until you get so much cash where you just have to invest it. And then, of course, when you have a bunch of reserve cash, you've got to put it into property because that's going to make more sense to you. And because you made it doing property, you're going to know where to invest it. They say you need money to make money. I say that's silly. In fact, if you can't make money with no money, you probably aren't going to be able to make money with money. So did I say that right? If you can't make money with no money, you won't be able to make money with money. Learn how to do it with no money first, and that way when you invest real money or real credit, you're going to be able to do it the right way and not screw it up and lose those assets. All right, hope that helps.